And we can get started. This is the agenda. So we just had this very brief welcome and introduction. We're going to start now with the legal, financial, and administrative aspects of the call for proposals. We will have a little break at 11:15, and after that we will welcome our colleagues that I mentioned earlier from the policy units from D2 and D5. You will know more information about what they do later. They will present to you the policy aspects of both calls. So we'll have first the organized crime call being presented, and then at 11:40 approximately, the colleagues from D2 that take care of Protect will come in. The whole session will be recorded, so if you cannot stay until the end, you'll have access to this video recording later. So the session of today covers different elements of the call text, not necessarily all of them. So we encourage you to turn to the text, which is the only official and legal source of information concerning the call, and the only legally binding source of information, of course.
Now it's my turn to present this part. I'm Girma Nushkevičiūtė. So we'll go through the legal, administrative, and financial aspects for these two call proposals. We will first of all give you a general overview of both calls. Then we will speak about the eligibility and admissibility criteria. We will quickly have a look at the evaluation process. Then we will guide you through the drafting of your application, and we will finish with the possibility for you to ask questions, how you can do it, when you can do it, and so on. So yeah, that was that. I will start with the call that I'm responsible for, which is the organized crime call, which you probably know launched on 12th of December. The submission date for your applications is 12th of March. You still have about 7 weeks to either finalize or start preparing your proposal. For the time being, I saw we have 15 drafts already in the system. Once the applications are submitted, mid of March, we will start with evaluation. We will use most probably external experts for this evaluation, and we'll finalize it in July. Then you will be informed about your application more or less by the end of the summer, and the successful projects would be invited to the grant preparation process in early autumn, September, October. And we hope to finalize the grants, the signing of the grants by the end of the year. So this is to give you also a clue that you should, in your applications, you could put the starting date of your project actually either December 24 or January 2020. A few tips: please really avoid the late submission of your proposal, because you might have some technical issues, and not the last hour of before the deadline, because many organizations might be connected and you might have problems, and you will have a chance to ask us questions during this remaining time until the submission, but not 7 calendar days before the submission deadline. So actually for this call on organized crime, you can ask questions until 29th of February. This call is mainly about dismantling organized crime structures and their business models. It has 4 horizontal priorities and 2 specific crime priorities on THB and drugs. But since our colleagues from Policy Unit are coming and they will speak very much in depth about it, I will not go more into details about this. They have a wonderful presentation later on. So we have 20 million euros for this call. Based on the funding requested by the selected projects, we might finance about 6 or 7 projects. And of course, we always reserve the right not to distribute all the funds available. Now I will speak about the admissibility. So when we receive your applications, we start with so-called preliminary checks of the formal requirements, which are eligibility and admissibility. So please send your applications, as we said, before the deadline, not 30 seconds before the submission deadline. Do it via the electronic submission system on the Funding and Tender Opportunities portal. We call it FTOP. And not by email or by post, which was done still some years ago, if I remember myself. Very important that you submit all the necessary forms, which are now submission form Part A, Part B, and Part C. I already warned you, there is a novelty. Part C we have never had in ISF calls, so there is a new part that you should not forget. And especially in Part B, please do not customize the document. We remember sometimes people like to delete some instructions or make a font a bit smaller so that you have more space. So no, please don't do that. And include all the mandatory information. There is one mandatory annex for us. It's the list of previous projects. Now, you or your consortium members might not have participated in the EU calls before, but still you should submit this annex, even if almost empty or with only some smaller projects mentioned. Now, your application should be drafted in one of the EU languages, but we kindly ask you to do it in English. It's the preferred language also for our experts. And of course, if it's in French, ça va aller. And failure to comply with these requirements will unfortunately lead to the inadmissibility of your application.
Sorry, I'm seeing in the chat that some people are complaining about microphones being on, and I see some participants have them on. Can everyone please mute themselves so that everyone can hear properly, please? Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you. Yes. Then we also check the eligibility. And in eligibility, we check actually 3 elements. So the eligibility of the applicant, so yourself, and the co-applicants. Then the application itself, eligibility of application, and eligibility of the activities, meaning the action's duration, the transnational component, the EU requested contribution. And again, similarly, failure to comply with these, unfortunately, might lead to the ineligibility of your application. So now, very concretely for the organized crime call, when we speak about applicants or co-applicants, the legal status, we require minimum 2 legal entities, natural persons are not eligible, coming from 2 member states participating in ISF. And you can have non-profit public entities and non-profit private entities both as beneficiaries and coordinators, while profit-making entities and international organizations can only be beneficiaries but not the coordinators. And third country entities are not allowed to participate as beneficiaries or coordinators. But in the next slide, I will mention how they can be involved in the project. So yes, like we said, minimum 2 applicants, beneficiaries, not affiliated entities, representing 2 different eligible countries. And for this call, these are EU member states, including overseas countries and territories, excluding Denmark, simply because Denmark doesn't participate in ISF. And for international organizations, we don't have limitation in terms of country of establishment. But we already received a lot of questions from you about these third countries. Because on page 12, you might have seen of the call text, we have targeted countries, mentioned that the activities can target third countries. And so the questions were, so then exactly how do we do that without having them in the consortium? So projects might implement activities related to such target countries without having entities from these third countries as beneficiaries, meaning those who receive the EU grant. And these entities from targeted countries could join the project consortia as associated partners. Associated partners are those that implement activities, but without receiving any EU funding. And if these activities are related to the action, the cost of such activities related to third countries could be incurred by the beneficiaries of the grant and could be considered as eligible. For this call, the project duration should be exactly 24 months. I want to draw your attention because in the past we saw some applications submitted for 23, 24 months, and unfortunately they were considered ineligible just for this almost stupid mistake. So they cannot be longer nor shorter for in the duration. And applications for ongoing projects would be considered ineligible, as well as applications for projects whose activities have already started before the date of the submission. And the last point on eligibility for this call on organized crime is the EU contribution. So the requested EU contribution of the project budget could be between 1 million and 3 million. These minimum and maximum amounts actually refer to the requested EU contribution and not to the total budget of the action. So, which means that your project's budget could be higher than 3 million, provided that the 90% that EU covers is within the limits mentioned above. And now it's Tamara's time to present her call.
Exactly. So we're going to go through the same points with small differences. Some parts are pretty much the same for both calls, so I'll go through them quicker. First, we start with an overview of the timeline for the Protect call. The call was published on the 21st of December, but the submission will only be made available from the 8th of February. That means if you have tried to submit your applications until now, you will have seen that is not possible. So the call text is available since December. You can already start working on your applications, of course, but the submission is opened only from the 8th of February. The deadline for submitting applications is the 4th of April at 5 p.m. And the evaluation will commence in April, right after the call closure. We will go through the different steps of the evaluation over the course of April, May, and June, and it will be probably approximately in June when we will inform applicants. The signature of the grants will tentatively happen in September. And yes, about the application, we will go a bit more into details later on, but many of you are familiar with it already. But as you know, it takes between 2 and 3 months. So just so that you have an idea. So the protocol this time, for those who are frequent clients, it's larger in terms of topics covered. We have places of worship and CVRN as usual, but this year there are some new areas, policy areas covered, such as trafficking of and misuse of firearms. The colleagues from D2 will present more in depth each of the topics, but I wanted to give you an overview of all the policy areas that you can prepare applications for. So we have places of worship, general places of worship, and topics specifically for Jewish places of worship, CVRN threats in public areas, firearms, as I just mentioned, and also detection of explosives with dogs, and countering threats posed by non-cooperative drones. The budget of the project is 30 million, is larger than in the previous call, so we expect a lot of applications. There is, as you can see in the call text, a small amount reserved for the topic of Jewish places of worship. And Ismaila, my colleague responsible for these topics, will give you much more information about this later. But as already mentioned by Girma, the Commission reserves the right to not distribute all the funds available. So very quickly, because Girma already explained that, in order for the application to be admissible, you need to submit it before the deadline, obviously, through the system, the electronic submission system of the FTOP, which is the portal where we publish our calls and where you can see all the information about them. The relevant templates are called Part A, B, and C. Part A, you fill it in directly online. Part B, where you explain in depth your application, your proposal, You download it from the portal, fill it in, and then upload it as a PDF. And Part C, it's a new document that it's also to be filled in online, and it concerns the key performance indicators, which is a novelty we will explain later on more in depth. Part B, as Gilma said, cannot be customized. You need to stick to the template, to the 50 pages, which is the maximum. And you must not forget the list of previous projects, which is a mandatory annex. Yes. The eligibility conditions of the call are outlined in section 6. Concerning the establishment of the organizations applying, the requirements concerning the duration, the minimum maximum budget. So you can I will explain in the next slide more in depth the conditions for applicants. Legal status of the co-applicants, they must be legal entities. Again, natural persons are not eligible. They must be established in an EU country, except for Denmark, as Gilma said, because Denmark doesn't participate in ISF. And consortium must be composed of at least 3 different member states, so entities from different member states. In the table, you can see an overview of the who's eligible and who's not, and under which role. What it's actually fast to tell you what's not eligible, and that is international organizations and non-EU countries as coordinators. They can participate as co-beneficiaries of the grants. In the case of non-EU countries, it's not any non-EU country. There is a selection of non-EU countries that are eligible to participate under this call that you can see in section 6 and 2 of the call text. Now, this I already said a little bit before, is minimum 3 applicants, legal entities established in 3 different member states. Yes. Concerning the duration, in our case, in the case of Protect, the duration is maximum 36 months. In the past, if you apply to the previous call, you will remember that it was 24. Now we've made it a bit longer, so this is the new maximum duration, and the extensions are possible if duly justified, as usual. And yeah, sorry, ongoing, go one back. Ineligible proposals will be those for projects that are already ongoing, or for projects whose activities have started before the date of the application submission. Sorry. Now, concerning the EU contribution, you must request between 500,000 and 3 million euros for all topics except for the one dedicated to the protection of Jewish places of worship. In this case, the maximum requested EU contribution is 5 million and the minimum is 500,000. This is the only difference that there is in terms of the EU contribution. You must respect this threshold. You cannot submit a proposal with a lower budget or a higher budget. It will be considered ineligible directly. So now, the further considerations which are applicable to both calls. Wherever is applicable, and I can tell you in most of the cases, you must indicate how your proposal is building up on previous and EU-funded projects, not necessarily ISF, but also Horizon. You should, this is part of the relevance assessment, actually. We pay particular attention to how proposals, potential funded projects will elaborate on what has been already achieved by previously funded projects. You should also draft a concise and comprehensive communication, dissemination, and visibility strategy. You are evaluated based on that as well. And we care about this a lot too. We will again emphasize and elaborate on this later on. And of course, project must comply with the EU policy interests and priorities such as environment, industrial trade policy, etc. Now, there is a novelty introduced under the last multi-annual financial framework. For those who apply to our fund until 2020, this is completely new to you. It concerns the Part C that I mentioned earlier. Now, the projects must contribute to the assessment of the performance of the ISF. The Internal Security Fund will be evaluated on its performance, and for that we need projects to contribute with certain set of data. There is a list of indicators that you will need to fill in at the application stage, and this list of indicators will have to be fed again at the end of your project if you are awarded. This is simply to assess the performance of the ISF fund. And this is one of the novelties of the new MFF, but there is also the decision on unit cost. Some of you may be already familiar with it. You have the link in the presentation. It was amended and updated in July last year. So this is now applicable to travel and subsistence cost. This mainstream applies to all of the goals and to all of the beneficiaries. To finalize, applications should comply with other relevant ethical principles, respect individual rights and freedoms, and pay attention and comply with the principles enshrined in the EU, in the Article 2 of the Treaty and Article 21 of the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights.
I see that there are questions being posted in the chat. Just to let you know, because I know that many people are joining, I see on my screen many people are joining only now. So maybe you haven't heard the announcement in the beginning that we will not be answering the questions today, but we will be collecting them. So you can either post them in the chat or send them to our functional mailbox, which maybe we can even post in the chat, one of us?
Yes.
Because if it's a long question, you know, in the chat, it might not be so easy to read it. And now we will move to, yes, thanks, Tamara. We'll move to the evaluation process. We'll explain to you a little bit how your applications are evaluated in the Commission. So all of your applications will be assessed. I already mentioned that we first start with preliminary checks. So the proposals checked for formal requirements, admissibility and eligibility. And only those passing this stage go to the technical evaluation. So we assess these proposals against the operational capacity and award criteria. Then we rank them and give them the scores and select the winners. And this is done in a two-step evaluation procedure. We first check the relevance of the proposals, and then we go to the quality and impact stage. It's very important in the first step to pass a certain threshold. So only proposals that get 21 points out of 30 go to the next stage and being evaluated against quality and impact. We always inform all the applicants about their evaluation results, and the successful ones are invited to the grant preparation, and others either are put under the reserve list or receive a rejection letter. So in terms of scores, like I said, for relevance, you absolutely need to get 21 out of 30. For quality, we give 50 out of 100, and for impact, 20. So the overall pass score is 70. So those who are not invited to sign the grant but are above 70 might be still on the reserve list. And a few months after we sign the grants, we usually have a possibility to invite a few projects from the reserve list to join us and sign the grants. So now we will look a little bit more deeper into these 3 award criteria, because in the past, those who participated in our previous calls, you might have seen a much longer list of these criteria. So what do we check under relevance? Under relevance, we want to see the clarity and consistency of the objectives. Can you just mute for a second?
Sowieso, wat ik ga doen, ik ga dat ook jou en Jordi in de CC als ik iets bedenk.
Goed.
Ik word echt zo moe van. Weet je, het kost echt zoveel overlegsuren.
Ja.
We zijn er bezig met de overlegingplaats om iets goeds te doen.
Maar hij wil goed communiceren, maar dan gaat hij mensen uit de reply halen.
Ja.
Waaronder de programmamanager.
Precies. Maar volgens mij, volgens mij weet niet dat Jordi is de projectmanager. Interesseert hem mij ook niet, hè?
Nee.
Ik denk dat wel dat het meer is, maar dat ga ik ook tegen Jordi zeggen.
Hello, please. Please note that I just muted everyone because there's people still complaining about the background noise. So if you, if you have any issues, put your questions in or your issues in the chat. We will just mute everyone so that we don't have this background noise constantly. Okay.
And I hope you hear us.
Yes, please confirm if you. Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
Great.
Thank you very much.
So we go back to the step 1, relevance. So was I saying that we check the clarity and consistency of the objectives and the scope of the project. We also see if the application addresses well relevant EU strategic documents and action plans. We also want to see that previous results of other projects in this field were taken well in the account as well. And we always insist on European transnational dimension of your actions. So step 1 is extremely important. Do your best to draft a proposal fully in line with the priorities of the call, because you might submit a wonderful project, maybe, for example, on corruption, but it would not be relevant at all for the organized crime call. Under quality, so here we used to have a much longer list of sub-criteria, which were also scored separately. Now we actually brought them together, several of these criteria, and you need to pay attention not only to these different criteria, but sub-criteria, but also the connection between these different activities. So here we are checking the appropriateness of the methodology, the expertise and quality of the consortium and your project team, management structures and procedures, also the risks and the mitigation measures you propose, the feasibility of the project within the proposed timeframe, and the cost effectiveness and best value for money. So all of this is under one criterion for which you can get up to 50 points. For example, as regards budget, your application should include a coherent presentation of the budget that links costs, proposed actions, and co-applicants. What does it mean in detail? You have to demonstrate that costs allocated to applicants are proportionate to the role and the work to be conducted in the project. And persons' months in each work package are proportionate to the activities to be conducted. For example, lower or high budget can only be assessed in relation to the proposed action. Am I achieving what I plan to do within the proposed budget? Is the budget adequate to cover what you propose to do? We advise you not to present your budget with a minimum EU requested grant, only to seem cost effective. Actually, it may not be adequate to implement your project, and this will make your proposal less credible. and then you will be scored lower because you failed to properly foresee costs for some of the activities. And under impact, activities for impact must also be linked, as this criterion will be assessed also in a global manner, just like the quality one. For example, all these different elements evaluated here, they have to be considered together. For example, if you do not have an appropriate communication strategy, the sustainability of your project will be less credible. So yes, here we are checking the expected short-term and long-term impact, the degree of ambition and innovation in the field, appropriateness of communication and dissemination strategy, sustainability of the results after EU funding ends, and replicability of your project results. And with this, we conclude a short presentation on the evaluation. We will, for both calls, use external experts. For step 2, for sure. For step 1, we might have a few colleagues also from DG Home being involved. But since we are expecting a lot of applications, we might have external experts who have a huge expertise in the field, in the area, to help us with the evaluation.
Now to wrap up this evaluation slash application part, a few tips and guidelines. First of all, I would recommend you to read the call text very carefully, make sure you understand what's expected, what the priorities are. If you do not find answers to your questions in the FAQs, you can always send us an email to the functional mailbox that I put in the chat. And all this to say that you must prepare your proposal very well, make it relevant and make it understandable easily. Do not, please go to the next slide. Do not try to add very complicated concepts that are not going to be easily accessible by our evaluators. So also look at according to the priorities and expectations that we present in the call text. Make sure to build as a relevant consortium with entities having the right expertise. Make sure to involve everyone that should be involved in a consortium to conduct the project that you are envisioning. Of course, make also sure to have a transnational dimension. This is something that we pay a lot of attention to. It will make your proposal relevant. It will make your proposal more sustainable because your results are more likely to be applicable in different contexts at the European level. So to wrap up, be explicit, know the call text very well, draft and submit a concise proposal that conveys the ideas that you have in a clear manner, because it will be evaluated based on that. We will not drag on trying to imagine what you meant to say by this or that. You need to make a very concise and to the point proposal. Of course, check it several times, try to get ready well before the deadline, because there might be last minute technical issues and nobody wants that. So plan ahead. Proofread, of course, and save it often. That's also a good tip. So a few checklists concerning the application process. Most of you, or many of you at least, will be familiar with this. You may even already have a PIC number, but if you don't, this is the first thing you need to do. Register in the portal, get a PIC number, and then start preparing your application. As I said, part A is the administrative part, which is filled in directly online. Part B contains the actual proposal, your ideas, the project you want to carry out, and you will upload this document as PDF into the portal, together with a list of previous projects. Very important. Part C is to be filled in online as well, and is this list of indicators that I have just explained, which are meant to assess the performance of the Internal Security Fund. So you can see the list of indicators in the link that we have in the presentation. I advise you to familiarize with them just to get an idea of what kind of information you may be requested to fill in. And last but not least, section 5 of the call text contains the annexes that you must, if necessary, upload as a PDF. During the application, you'll be asked to, in part A, there is this self-assessment that you must do, and it concerns your legal status, the legal status of your entity. Make sure to do it correctly, because this will be checked by us upon receiving your application. So once we start the admissibility checks, so make sure to select the right type of entity. Once again, natural persons are not eligible, so just make sure that you're a legal entity established in the right countries and that you are applying under the correct role. This you can check again in section 6 and section 2 of the call text. If awarded, this is again checked by another service in the European Commission once the grant is being prepared. So make sure to do it correctly. Some useful sources, the call text for both protect and organized crime, you can find in this slide and also in the call page in the FTOP. If you have any further concerns or issues, questions, you can always ask us in the functional mailbox. But of course, I encourage you to go through the FAQs we already have in the portal, and the topic-specific FAQs, and the online manual that it's available as well in the FTOP.
Now we give the floor to our colleague Philip, who will present the eligibility of costs.
Hello and good morning also from my side. My name is Philip Dai. I'm a co-coordinator of the AMIF Fund, but I have joined today's meeting for a few words as well, to mix things up a little bit. As Tamara has just pointed out about questions that we might receive from you about the call for proposal, eligibility of costs is one of those topics that we receive commonly a lot of questions on. And I can say right from the start that this is something that we will not in any formal way be assessing prior to the submission of your proposals, because we treat all applications and applicants equally, and it will be impossible for us to answer any questions on this topic without knowing your full application. So just to connect to what you were saying, I think that's one of the most important things to know when you're preparing the application. In any case, the eligibility of cost is something that will be determined at the grant preparation stage, in fact, fully. So the parameters of your grant will be set in the grant agreement. So the maximum grant amount, the funding rate, the total eligible costs. So that will all be only at the stage of grant preparation of the successful proposals. But that doesn't mean that you should try to add only eligible costs to your budget of your proposal, because if you clearly add costs that are ineligible, it might also have an impact on how we evaluate your proposal. That to say about this, the grant will be a budget-based mixed actual cost grant. That means you will be reimbursed for eligible costs that were actually incurred compared to the budget that you have provided at the start. So at the end of the grant, we will determine how much costs were actually incurred compared to your budget, and which of those were eligible. There are two types of, why do we say mixed? Because there are two types of cost types. One are the actual costs for most categories, and then there are unit costs for 3 specific categories, which are travel, accommodation, and subsistence. I will go into details of this later. Let's look first at the other budget categories. There are a few to consider. You will see the exact rules in the call text and also the model grant agreement, both available on the funding and tender portal. What is important to note is for equipment, usually depreciation is the only eligible cost, so not the full cost of the equipment. But please take note that your call might specify that certain types of full cost of equipment are in fact eligible. I have not written the call, so I cannot tell you now exactly which, but it is clearly defined, as I understand, in the call for proposals document, right? Then a topic that often comes up and questions and then also issues later at a grant preparation stage is the category of financial support to third parties, which is ineligible. But I think it's necessary to repeat and to get a joint understanding of what that means. Financial support to third parties are any forms of sub-grants, allowances, payments of money to third parties that do not have an invoice against it. So if you would have an allowance of €1,000 to participants of a training, that would be considered financial support to third parties and ineligible costs. So, or also sub-granting, because you decide that you would wish to have mini projects included in your project. This is all ineligible, and I would ask you to refrain from including such costs and also then related activities. In-kind contributions are ineligible. I will also say something about this on the next slide, but note that there is the cost type of volunteers, which are also eligible as a prefixed unit cost. I invite you to thoroughly check the call for proposals and the grant agreement for the exact rules of how to include volunteer costs. And then last on the slide, as you can see, are the travel, accommodation, and subsistence costs, which are reimbursed based on the unit cost rates defined in the 2 decisions that were published by the European Commission on this topic, which you are also able to find on the funding and tenders portal. Yes, more about unit costs. Can you click just twice? Because I think it should come in. And one more. I don't know what it is.
I have something, annotation request. What is this annotation?
Strange.
Click again. You see, I have this strange pen. What is this?
Sorry for this technical issue. There should be another box on the slide as well. But in any case, how do unit costs work in your grant and also in the preparation of your budget for your grant? You determine the number of units, meaning, for example, the number of persons traveling, the number of persons staying in a hotel somewhere and receiving subsistence allowance. And you also determine, or you look up the unit rate that is corresponding to the travel, accommodation, or subsistence that you are providing. Meaning, if you have 2 people traveling from Germany to France, and they are staying in a hotel for 3 days and receive subsistence for 2 days, you have all the necessary information to calculate the costs that will be eligible for reimbursement. I know I can see also that we have all the information on the slide. That's great. The unit cost, they cover the most frequent cases for travel, accommodation, and subsistence. In the box, you can see in the green box what is covered for travel, and in the yellow box, you can see what is covered for accommodation and subsistence. If you can find in the unit cost decisions that are published by the European Commission unit rates for a given travel, say, I was just mentioning from Germany to France, say for a travel of 300 kilometers,
Zeros now.
should be back.
Yes.
You see, there are others also speaking.
Sorry, are you still having issues with background noise? Okay, now, all right. Please, everyone back at home, mute yourselves, please. Thank you. Okay.
We don't know which part they missed now.
Still background noise, I see. Just give us a moment, 1 minute, and we will be back. We will return with the presentation in 1 minute. Can you just please mute yourself?
Everyone.
Si quieres la caja o una, si es la caja, ya te la llevas, porque la caja es suya, la tengo aquí guardada. La caja. Pues nada, la caja.
Okay, please. There is an attendee called DCI UCI UF Spain.
Say it in Spanish, maybe.
¿Podéis, por favor, apagar el micrófono? Can you confirm if you hear us well? The rest of the attendees, please. Yes. 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 Okay. Okay. Great. Sorry.
Okay. I'm not fully sure at which point we lost connection, but I was just explaining how unit costs are applied to the most frequent cases for travel, accommodation, and subsistence. In the green box, you can see the cases for travel, and then the yellow box for accommodation and subsistence. And if you can find in the unit cost decision a unit rate or a distance that is covered, you must apply this to your budget. For example, are you traveling for 350 kilometers from Germany to France? That will be travel intra-member states, 50 to 400 kilometers. If you are traveling to a third country, say from Germany to Senegal, it will be travel over 400 kilometers, and it will also be covered by the unit cost decision. If you have accommodation and subsistence costs in the 55 countries of the 193 in the world that are listed in the unit cost decision, you will need to apply the unit cost to your budget. And as I said before, you will need to determine the number of the units. You will look up the unit rate, and that will be the cost that you will be able to add to your budget. That said, there are cases that are not covered by the unit cost decision. The easiest one to detect is what is with travel below 50 kilometers, in fact. If they are not covered, it will be actual cost. Of course, you always have to ensure that all other criteria of eligibility for the costs are covered. So whatever travel is below 50 kilometers might be an actual cost, but you need to ensure that it is in line with the rest of the rules given in the call text and the grant agreement. Is the next slide. The first bullet point, you will receive this presentation via the funding intended portal following in a few days, I assume, is the link to the unit cost calculator for certain travels that are above 400 kilometers and not covered directly in decision, which will aid you in preparing your budget for traveling. It is important to note that the unit costs are calculated in a way that they cover all other auxiliary costs that are connected to your travel, meaning it's not only, for instance, the flight ticket, but it should also cover the transport to the airport, the transport from the airport, and other incidental expenditures that you will have during your trip. Specifically also the subsistence, which will cover all meals, coffees, and whatnot. So any other actual costs that you are applying for in the budget will be rendered most likely ineligible. Now, something that is very important to understand, the key notion that is most important to understand about unit costs is that they are not, that you are not aiming to spend exactly whatever the unit cost for a given travel, a given accommodation, a given subsistence is. If you are reimbursed 240 euros for a flight, it doesn't mean that you have to try as hard as possible to find a flight that is closest to 240 euro, and that anything that is above 240 euro is ineligible or something. We reimburse based on the travel information that you provide us. 240 euros will be what is calculated as on an average covering the given travel. Sometimes the flights will be 10 euros, 20 euros, 30 euros, or 100 euros less than that, and sometimes equally much more. That means, and that is also the case, of course, for hotels, and you also might have different internal subsistence policy than what we grant for the different types of subsistence. That means you are not aiming to have the exact unit rate, but you have to consider all your travels, all your accommodations, all your subsistence, actually all of this together as your full travel budget. And you will aim at not spending more on your travels than the total of all the unit costs that you have calculated. So when you prepare now your budget, you will think that maybe there will be 20 travels of days X length, and we will spend so and so much subsistence. You will look at the unit cost decisions, and you will create a table of all these costs that you expect to incur. And this will be the amount that you will add to your budget. Then, of course, it will be checked if you have a successful application during grant preparation, if it has been correctly applied. But this will be sort of your entire travel budget for all the travels. So during implementation, it will not be necessary to ask us, can we deviate from the unit cost? Can we, for this travel, can this travel be more expensive? Can this travel be less expensive? We are not, in fact, interested in knowing the details of that, which is also why the unit costs are a simplification. You will need to be in a position to to show that these travels have taken place, but the unit costs will make it easier to and simplify checking your budgets. Yes, I think those are the most important key points that I have to tell you about the unit costs. There are a few other slides, yes. Then there's also the, let's make a cut here and talk about co-financing. The maximum amount that will be reimbursed of your project is defined in the call text, which is 90%. It is important to note here that is the maximum that will be reimbursed. Means it can also be lower than that. Yeah, co-financing will be provided from the European Commission up to that amount, and then the other 10%, or what it will be, the other amount will have to be provided by the consortium of a given project. Where that money comes from is your decision, and also how that is split between the co-beneficiaries of a grant. That means it can be that one of the co-beneficiaries provides all the co-financing and another one provides none of the co-financing. That is up to the consortium to decide. Equally, also, you can decide how you distribute the costs of the budget among the beneficiaries, the co-beneficiaries. So it doesn't have to be that it's equally, that all applicants have equally 90% of the total eligible costs, but it could be that one has 85, the other one has 95. It just has to be that overall the budget is balanced. The total of all participating organizations have 90% maximum funding rate of the Commission and 10% maximum funding rate from other sources. One point to make here that is mentioned on the slide, that ineligible sources of co-financing are also ineligible costs. That's something that we receive a lot of questions on, and it's important to clarify this. If you propose to co-finance the budget with ineligible costs, for instance, in-kind contributions. So for example, you would say you own an office and you think it would be worth 2,000 euros a month to have this as a cost. This will be ineligible because we do not accept this as a cost of the grant. And equally, also your co-financing will be ineligible. And this will create, of course, issues in the implementation of your grant. So ensure that 100% of all the costs that you are incurring in the implementation of the action are eligible, to ensure that also 100%, that you will receive 90% of the co-financing from the Commission, and that equally the 10% that you are giving are also considered eligible from our side. I've mentioned that in-kind contributions are ineligible. I've noted before that volunteer costs are in part eligible. I would invite you to thoroughly read the call text, and if you plan to engage volunteers and have their costs as a form of co-financing, that you are strictly follow the rules that are provided in the call text and the grant agreement. Next slide, please. Finally, a topic that we also sometimes receive questions about during grant preparation, but I would say this is purely informational at this point, because those are not bridges that you will be crossing now during the preparation of your application, but something that you still, of course, need to take into consideration is your financial capacity. this will be assessed during grant preparation only. That means all successful applicants will be invited to have their financial capacity checked. Those are separate checks of our evaluation procedure carried out by central services. And these analyses will be based on some neutral financial indicators where you will have to provide your financial statement, your profit and loss. And if this is not sufficient, potentially other documents to assess for the European Commission to be able to assess your financial capacity to implement the project. And then if it is assessed positively, you can move on to grant preparation. If the assessment is weak, it might be necessary that changes to the grant are made, but all of this will only be relevant for those proposals that are selected and invited for grant preparation. If you wish already, because you are concerned that your organization might have weak financial capacity, or you would just want to be sure about some of these details, I refer here to the rules for legal entity validation and the information that is provided on the funding and tenders portal. And I think with this,
Thank you, Philip.
my part of the presentation ends. I wish you best of luck for your applications.
Thanks a lot, Philip.
Thank you, Philip. A final word about the submission and the questions that you might have. This information applies to both calls as well. When you're submitting your proposal, please be certain that you're submitting it to the right part. Part A needs to be submitted by for Part A and Part C for Part C. In other words, it has to be coherent. Also, we recommend you to submit your proposal before the deadline, because this is to avoid having technical difficulties on the last day and not being able to submit your proposal, which would be a waste of time. I hope you can still hear me, regardless of the background noise. Additionally, also regularly save a copy of your application, because that way you also avoid losing any work that you have put into it. In the portal, check the warning messages, because if they are in red, you'll be blocked, but in yellow, you can still pass it, and it will have an impact on your submission. Lastly, do know that this is a competitive call for proposal, meaning that only the, I wouldn't say best, but the very good applications will be selected for funding. If you have any questions, you can always go to the portal submission system and go to the IT help desk. And if you have questions that are not related to IT, you can send the questions to the following email address: home-isf@ec.europa.eu. And also, you should clearly state the topic related to your question by adding the topic ID. Next slide, please. If you have any questions, you could also take a look at the frequently asked questions. This list contains all questions received by the Commission that are relevant, that cannot be easily answered by just consulting call text or any other relevant documents. And the questions do not constitute a pre-proposal check. These questions will all be published on the funding and tenders portal to ensure that everyone has the access to the same information. Yes, this is how it looks like, what it looks like. Next slide, please. And lastly, there's a few types of questions that we as the Commission will address and we will not address. The questions that the Commission does address are questions that aim to get more clarification on the topic text, on the call text. So, for example, we put here on the organized crime call, how many priorities are to be addressed? This is a question that we will address. And also the second category, the questions regarding administrative, legal, or financial aspects. Again, is it possible to apply as an affiliate entity for a private entity? This is an example of a question that we would address. Next slide, please. But there's also questions that we as the Commission will not address. These questions include questions on the eligibility of applicants or activities on the outcome of the call. Questions on particular applications regarding your relevance, proposed outcomes, suitability of the consortium, or any other element falling under the evaluation criteria. There's a few listed in the slide. So again, these questions will not be addressed.
I think that's it. And with this, we finished our legal, administrative, and financial part of the info session.
So we take a break now and we come back at 11 o'clock.
At 11, we will start with the policy aspects of organized crime call until 11:40. So those interested, please join. And if you're interested in both calls, you can already be there at 11. Otherwise, those interested only in the protect call, join us around 11:30, 11:40. And we are planning to finish the info session at around 12:30, Brussels time, of course. So thanks a lot for your attention so far, and we'll be back at 11 Brussels time. Our info session. So we started the recording again. We see almost 270 people with us. Very exciting number. We are happy you are interested in our calls. So we will continue now with the policy part of these two calls. As I said, we'll start with the organized crime one, and our colleagues from the policy unit on organized crime and drugs, as well as trafficking in human beings, will present the objectives, the priorities, and the activities eligible for new applications under this call. So I pass the floor immediately to Marije.
Thank you, Girma. And good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Allow us to give a bit more in-depth information on why we actually made this call and what we are aiming to achieve and what we are looking for. So the main objective of our call is combating organized crime by dismantling criminal networks and their business models. As you may have noticed if you've been with us before, is that we are doing it a bit differently this way. We are not focusing on specific crime areas, but we really want to target those networks behind the crimes. So this represents a bit of a paradigm shift where we dismantle the networks as such. And for that reason, we have split the call into priority areas where we have 4 general priority areas that are applicable to criminal networks involved in any crime. So this is improving the intelligence picture on criminal networks. We want to know where they are, who they are, their modus operandi, etc. We want to facilitate cross-border investigations in a true EU spirit, of course. We want to facilitate financial investigations, which should be a core element of any investigations into organized crime. And we want to support crime prevention measures as a sustainable response to crime. And then we also have put the spotlight on true crime areas that we think are very important because of the damage they do and the amount of criminal networks that are involved in these crimes. So that would be drug trafficking and trafficking in human beings. And we also have colleagues here with us who will be able to tell us a bit more about that. Just for the general considerations, this is really important to emphasize because even though we do not exclude any crime area, we really want to focus on tackling criminal networks. So projects should not be about reducing the likelihood of one specific type of crime occurring, because we know that these criminal networks are polycriminal. So when one crime area goes down, they are profit oriented, so they will easily switch to another. And of course, we want to focus on those groups that present the greatest threats to society. Also important to mention that we really favor operational projects, and they should address major shortcomings or challenges. So really, be operational on the ground, as opposed to more research-oriented projects. Also good to mention, we welcome proposals that address more than one priority area that will increase the relevance to the main objective. For example, we could have projects that address intelligence picture and drug trafficking, or cross-border investigations and financial investigations. The more the better, and the more it actually applies to the main objective. And then, of course, this being a union call, we welcome proposals with a broad geographical scope that engages applicants from different parts of the EU, and that involves applicants from more member states than the minimum 2. So 2 is the minimum, but if there are more member states involved, more the better. And now I would like to pass the floor to my colleague Davide to give more information on the general OC organized crime parts.
Yes, thank you, Maria. Good morning, everyone. I'm Davide Dauria, and I also part of the OC team in DG Home, and I was involved in the preparation of this very important call, which, as Maria said, is very in line with the last documents that we published as Commission, but also is in line with the threat that organized crime is posing to EU. We have several figures that we can discuss, but we decided to focus on some of them. I mean, we are somehow dreamers here in the Commission, and we believe that we have to find a way to fight organized crime and to dismantle organized crime one for all. Why we are dreamer? Because we believe that all this money that you see in the figures, 139 billion euros, around 218 billion annually as a harm produced by organized crime, is something that should go in the state budget, not in the hands of the criminals. So we would like to focus on ideas, as Maria said, that are able to fight the networks as a whole, to focus on the structures of these networks, and to have long-lasting results in the fight against these networks. I will focus on the 4 horizontal areas of crime that are in the call. The first one is to improve the intelligence picture. Why we decide to focus on this? Since we see, as we see that there is still a gap in the way intelligence picture on these criminal networks, the high-risk criminal networks that are operating in EU, with strong links with the international criminal groups, is very important aspect to take into consideration in the coming years for several aspects. The first one being that having this robust intelligence picture is a key aspect to focus on prioritizing the investigations, prioritizing the efforts to dismantle these groups, and at the same time to have a more comprehensive overview of what is going on at the EU level, how these groups cooperate each other, how they are involved in different crime areas. In the previous slide, you can see that more than 70% of organized criminal groups operate in more than 3 member states, which means that the international dimension, the cross-border dimension is a key aspect here. And so we see this as a relevant aspect, both for the gathering of intelligence picture, so how they, different partners, different countries can contribute to build a common and global and robust intelligence picture on these groups, how they operate, how they infiltrate the legal economy, for example. But at the same time, on the second pillar of of this priority, we see that effective cross-border cooperation should be further improved. We have to provide a project that support member states, support the partners in the efforts to foster international cooperation, which is different from the national investigations. And ideas in this regard that do you see the slide? No?
Yes,
You have an issue? Okay, perfect. And then we go to the third aspect, the third pillar of this horizontal priorities, priority areas, which is the financial investigations. The financial dimension of organized crime is one of the key aspects that we deem very important in the future. Criminal activities produce a lot of revenues, which are sometimes reinvested in the illicit economy, but in many occasions, in many investigations have proved that this money go into the legal systems, which is polluted by this money, and they allow criminal organization to control legal business structures and to continue their activities from within the societies. So we think that having a stronger approach to the financial dimension of organized crime, facilitating, for example, parallel financial investigation when any investigation on organized crime is carried out by authorities and member states, this is a key aspect to also be strengthened in the projects. And this is very much linked with the cross-border cooperation, since financial investigation requires strong coordination and strong efforts to facilitate international cooperation and cross-border cooperation. And the fourth pillar is crime prevention. This is a very key aspect as well, since reinforcing our societies, building the resilience of the societies to the infiltration and the activities of organized crime is a key aspect to be considered in any action against organized crime. One of the key elements that I will highlight in this occasion, and you will find this in the call as well, that the barrier models have proved to be very important. We have several best practices that we have in several cases, in several member states, for example, but this is still need to be further explored, further developed, since we have seen that building the resilience of the society has a spillover effect on, for example, the recruitment of children, the violence that we see in the country. So this is a key aspect that we want also to support in this call for the future. So thank you very much for your attention. I will now pass the floor to my colleague. Thanks again.
Thank you, Davide. So good morning, everyone. My name is Pedro Felicio, and I'm a policy officer working here in the drugs team here at DG Home. So the point now is to talk to you a little bit about our ISF call on drugs. What can I tell you about this? I can tell you a lot, but I will focus only on a couple of topics. So I'll basically try to guide you through what is the background of this call, what are the priorities, the objectives that we have, and on a more practical side, what could be possible activities that we will be very much interested in funding. So let us go through this and let us start with the background. So the background, it is quite a relevant one, I would say. As we all know, I believe the production of drugs is increasing currently. So looking into last year, the production of drugs, of cocaine, increased by 35%, of heroin by 28%, and looking into seizures in the EU, in 2022, we had a total of 303 tons of cocaine alone being seized in Europe. And this is quite high, looking into what was historically, let's say, the figures. And of course, more production means more organized crime. More organized crime means more violence. And this means, again, more corruption. So we have production increasing, but also addiction is increasing. Over the last 10 years, it increased by 45%. So around 5% per year. And addiction is increasing not because the production is increasing, but also because the purity of drugs is increasing. Because of course, the cartels, they're making it specifically to get more people addicted. So over the last year, it increased around 40%. And all of this is making drugs more affordable. Cocaine, for instance, is 38% more affordable than it was 10 years ago. And so all of this means more and more profits for organized crime. And that's why you see there the number of 30 billion euros per year, which is making the drugs market the largest and the most profitable market within all of the criminal markets in Europe. So the situation is bad. And the fact is, it's not getting any better. It's actually still getting worse. Last year alone, in Antwerp, which is the main point of entry for cocaine in Europe, new records were broken, and the cocaine seizures increased again from 110 metric tons to 116. So the problem is still a problem that is on the rise. And so, of course, the highest political spheres, you can see my boss there on the picture, Commissioner Ylva Johansson. So they're stepping in because they realize that this is quite a serious issue. And that is why we have this ISF call coming in with our main objective, of course, to strengthen the capabilities of the in the fight against drug trafficking. So that was the background. So what we need is proposals that are in line with one of these three key political instruments that we have. And these are those instruments right there. They're quite comprehensive, quite extensive documents. They detail all the priorities that we would be interested in funding. And I would suggest that you take a close look at these documents because they're quite extensive. We will not have time to go in detail through all of them, and they're all public and they're quite easy to find on the internet. Something that is important about this call alone, and this was mentioned already by my colleague Morai, we are indeed interested in approaching the networks as a whole and not the case by case, not the commodity. So instead of a bottom-up approach, we're now looking into a top-down approach. So this is something that we would value very much in all of the applications. So keep in mind everything that focuses on organized crime groups, on high-risk criminal networks, especially the ones that are behind the multi-ton trafficking of drugs into the EU or within the EU. So my idea now is to take a closer look at these documents one by one and to try to come up with some practical examples. The first is, of course, the EU drug strategy. It is divided in 6 main areas, and you can see there those main areas. So the 3 first one are what we would call the 3 big policy areas. So basically they're focusing on supply, on demand, and in harm reduction. So supply means let's stop drugs from being trafficked, from being produced. Demand, let's try to reduce people from using it. And harm, of course, let's try to treat and rehabilitate people who have problems with drugs. And then we have the 3 cross-cutting priorities that you can see there, because they're kind of horizontal. They go through all of this. And you can see them there in the slide, so no need for me to go through them. And then all of these 6, they will divide themselves into 11 strategic priorities. And I will spare you for going through all of them, because this is quite a broad document. But for example, you could think about including projects that would somehow be projects that would assist us in countering, let's say, the production of drugs within the EU. For instance, we have a problem with synthetic drugs. We have a problem with indoor cannabis cultivations. So whatever projects we could come up that would assist us in stopping the production and exports of these drugs, these would be always something that we would be interested in. How to improve police cooperation between origin and destination countries. This would be something we would be, of course, interested in looking into. And not just what is being produced in Europe, because this is a broad strategy, and also what is being produced elsewhere and is then being smuggled and is then being imported to Europe. And think about anything related with the production or exports of cocaine, heroin, and you can be quite imaginative about these projects. Not only this, but also projects to reduce the demand that drugs citizens will have, or to reduce the harm that is causing upon drug consumers. Things like consumption rooms, things like mobile teams to take care of homeless people that have problems with drugs. So this would be more or less everything that would fit in the strategy. So it is quite a broad document, but things start to get a bit more specific on our second document, which is maybe you can click. Yeah. Yes, the EU Drugs Action Plan. Thank you. And so the action plan is a bit more of a detailed document that will actually bring more elements to the strategy. It is now divided in 85 actions that are divided according to them. I already mentioned the three large policy areas and the three cross-cutting teams, and they're meant to fulfill the 11 strategic priorities that I mentioned already. So it is basically bringing you more information and more detail on how can we actually achieve the strategy. And this will include anything that has to do, for instance, let's think about projects that can assist in detecting drugs at airports, at train stations, at any other hotspots. Things like high-tech scanners, sensors, surveillance equipment. We can think about projects to enhance detection and distribution of drugs in postal items, in parcels. Anything that can think about, for instance, coming up with solutions with artificial intelligence to come up with red flag indicators to explain what packages should be sent for inspection or not. Projects that will be also aimed at preventing, again, drug use and to raise awareness. For instance, raising awareness on the topics of synthetic drugs and harms to the mental health of users. So this would all be possible under our action plan.
Excuse me, 1 second. There's background noise. I'm going to mute everyone and then unmute yourself, please. Done. Okay, we're sorry for the background noise and we hope now it's better. If you can confirm in the chat, please.
Have muted all.
Yes, okay. Please do not unmute yourselves. Leave all your questions in the chat, okay? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that would lead us to the third key policy document that I would like to present to you today, which is also the most recent one, which is the EU roadmap to fight drug trafficking and organized crime. And this is, again, a very, very concrete document. I would say probably the most concrete of these, because it is comprised of 17 different actions that are under the 4 priority areas. You can see them there. These are these priority areas. And so the actions contained there are very concrete, and they would be very easy to relate directly with projects. Once again, this is our most recent policy document, so it's quite high on our agenda. So this could also be something that could benefit projects coming in. So what can be included in these documents? Everything that could be projects to support the European Ports Alliance. We just had a launch of this initiative 2 days ago. And so anything that could be, again, projects to improve the resilience of ports, high-tech scanners, sensors to detect drugs, operational tools, software, equipments to facilitate the cooperation between law enforcement and customs authorities. So this would be all welcomed here. But more than that, we would need also projects to prevent the infiltration of organized crime into ports and to come up, organize, assist the establishment of investigative cells that would jointly have of customs and police working together. Projects that would assist in the implementation of more controlled deliveries, because indeed, it's not just about seizing drugs in ports. It's not just about making the arrests. It's about making sure that we can do all that and have asset recovery actions that will come after, just like my colleague mentioned before. And also, because this is quite a vulnerability, projects focusing on preventive and anti-corruption measures within ports and in assisting anti-corruption investigations. But it goes beyond that. So the EU roadmap focuses not only on the situation within, because of course the drugs problem is a global one. So any project that would help us into establish or reinforce operational, political, or strategic cooperation with countries of origin, think about countries like Colombia, Ecuador, Brazil, etc. These projects would also be within our interest. And we think about things, for instance, like fusion centers, like special investigation teams, where we could have colleagues from member states, colleagues from Europol, we could have liaison officers to a Medipol. So basically, as you can see in the field of drugs, anything is possible. And the only real limit, I would say, would be your imagination. And so, let's see if this works, hopefully, because it will try to recap the presentation in one slide.
There is no sound.
Yes, we don't have sound, but luckily we have some good
Captions.
captions, and the message is actually the most important. It gives you an idea of the priorities that I mentioned throughout the presentation and on why this is such an important topic for us right now. And for that reason, and for all of the political interest in the area of drugs, we will be looking into your proposals with a lot of attention. And we are expecting for a lot of good and a lot of interesting proposals. And once this is, I think I could pass this to the next.
Yeah.
Joining online.
See it already? Okay. Next slide. So.
Thank you. Hello,
We
everyone.
have our colleague who will present
Yes,
the
I see her.
THP, and she's unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Lucy, can you unmute yourself, please? And
I am unmuted.
tell us if you are ready.
Can you hear me?
We cannot hear you.
I can hear her, but perhaps you can't hear her. But the others can hear her.
Okay, so I think yes, everyone can hear me except in the room in DigiHome.
We do. We
hear you now.
Okay,
We
great.
know.
Perfect. Okay, so I will start. So I will present the crime priority on strengthening the fight against trafficking in human beings. So next slide, please.
Next slide.
It's the video.
Yeah, so here I put a short video. I'm not sure it works.
It is
Yes,
working.
it works. Okay, we can watch it very quickly. So it's a campaign that the Commission launched in order to raise awareness of the risk of trafficking in human beings. It was launched on the EU Anti-Trafficking Day on the 18th of October 2023, and it focuses on 3 forms of exploitation: sexual exploitation, labor exploitation, and forced begging. So you can go to the next slide now, please.
Yes.
Thank you. So I will present briefly the situation related to trafficking in human beings in 2022. So this is the latest data that we have from Eurostat that was published yesterday. According to the data, 10,093 victims of trafficking in human beings were registered in 2022. And this represents an increase compared to previous years, as in previous year, we had around 7,000 victims registered per year. In terms of citizenship, 37% of the victims were EU citizens, and 63% were non-EU citizens. Among the EU citizen victims, we see that quite a significant part are registered within their own country of citizenship, also pointing to the fact that there is also trafficking happening within the same country, and not only in the cross-border aspect. In terms of the age of the victims, 15% of the registered victims were children. So we see that children continue to be victims of trafficking for all forms of exploitation. Can you go to the next slide, please?
Yes.
Thank you. The 63% of the registered victims were female and 37% were male. So while we see that female victims remain the majority of the victims, there has been an increase in the number of men being victims of trafficking. This might be explained also by the fact that there has been an increase in trafficking for labor exploitation, which normally is mainly involve mainly male victims. And now trafficking for labor exploitation represents 40% of all the registered cases, and sexual exploitation represents 41%. And there are also cases of all the forms of exploitation, such as forced begging or criminal activities. Next slide, please. In terms of the criminal justice data, so we see that we have in 2022 8,064 suspects for trafficking offenses registered within the EU, 4,356 prosecuted persons, and 2,433 persons. So we see the importance of addressing the criminal and strengthening the criminal justice response to trafficking, as we see that there is a gap between the number of convicted persons and the number of registered suspects. Next slide, please. So the EU takes a comprehensive approach to combating trafficking in human beings, which is anchored in the EU strategy on combating trafficking, which applies for the year 2021-2025. And the call for proposal on organized crime contributes to the implementation of the strategy. The strategy focuses on 4 areas of action: to reduce the demand that fosters trafficking, to break the criminal model to halt the victims' exploitation, to protect, support, and empower the victims, especially women and children, and the international dimension. Next slide, please. Thank you. So here I will mention a few key actions of the EU strategy, which are particularly relevant in relation to this call for proposal. So in particular, to enhance the coordination of law enforcement services in cross-border and international cases and support multi-stakeholders coordinated responses, to enhance law enforcement and judicial cooperation between member states through concrete operational projects under the ISF, and the facilitation of the creation of a focus group of specialized prosecutors against trafficking in human beings. So on the focus group of specialized prosecutor, I will just mention briefly, we had already 2 meetings organized together with Eurojust, one online in 2022 and another one at Eurojust premises in 2023. And the meeting gathered judicial authorities from all the EU member states in order to share experience and best practices and the main challenges in cross-border judicial cooperation against trafficking in human beings within the EU. And we would welcome projects with several member states involved that would also contribute to the activities of the focus group, for example, by developing guidance on specific issues or aspects of the trafficking in human beings, or organizing meetings to share best practices and challenges in order to improve cross-border judicial cooperation. Thank you. Next slide. So the main priorities of the core are to improve the referral in relation to trafficking in human beings, are to improve the referral of trafficking victims to support services, following operational anti-trafficking action, including cooperation between law enforcement authorities and victim support services. So here we would like to focus and have a proposal of projects focusing on the follow-up to, for example, joint action days that are organized sometime within the framework of impact, THB, and to ensure that the victims that are identified as part of this action are referred to the victim support services. They are taken in charge and have access to the right that they are entitled to under the legal framework. The second priority in relation to trafficking is to improve the protection of victims in criminal proceedings. So to ensure that the victims have access to all the rights that they are entitled to in criminal proceedings, and also to encourage their participation in criminal proceedings. The third priority is to promote awareness raising, including measures addressing the demand that fosters trafficking in human beings. And the fourth priority is to explore the links between trafficking in human beings and other forms of serious crime, including corruption and drug trafficking. And I'd just like to mention here that the 4 horizontal priorities that were mentioned by my colleagues earlier are also relevant for trafficking human beings. So, for example, to enhance financial investigation or cross-border investigation. So here I put a few examples of relevant activities and outcomes that are mentioned in the core and that are horizontal to all the priorities, but also apply to trafficking human beings. So for example, I already mentioned the focus group of specialized prosecutors. So that would be to develop measures, tools, and methodologies aimed at improving prosecution and criminal judicial proceedings, including the setting up of network of specialized prosecutors. Prevention and awareness activities, including communication campaigns and action in relation to and in non-EU countries, such as improving police cooperation and coordination between law enforcement authorities in non-EU country and international organization, including joint investigation teams and any other form of cross-border joint operation. Next slide, please. Just a few additional consideration. The project must support or complement the action within the framework of impact trafficking human beings. We also encourage the active participation of law enforcement and judicial authorities in cooperation with civil society organizations. The project should have a practical outcome and aim at making a difference on the ground, and all the forms of exploitation are covered under the THB priority, so we don't focus on one specific form of exploitation. Thank you very much.
References. Thank you, Lucy. I think this wraps up all the information we can give you on the call on the policy aspects. When in doubt, I would say base yourself really carefully on the call text, because we thought long and hard about how to shape the text. And also don't forget about the main objective of dismantling organized crime. That's really important. We also indeed included some references. I think when the slides will be shared, you can click on the links. If you want to know more about any of our policy areas, don't hesitate to consult these documents. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you.
Yes. Now we're going to move on to the policy aspects of Protect. Meanwhile, you could see that we welcome 3 new colleagues and a dog who's running around the room. So I'm going to now pass it over to my colleagues from D2. Some will join online. I think the first colleague is Ismaela. Isma, can you please? I see you're there. Let's do a sound test, please.
Yes. Can you all hear me from there?
In the room we hear you, and I guess in online people also can hear. Yes. Okay. All great. So please go ahead.
Thank you, Tamara. Thank you, colleagues. A very good morning to everybody. My name is Ismaela Murja, and as you can see from the slides, I am the policy officer within DG Home D2 Counterterrorism Unit, responsible for the 2 priorities within the new Protect call: protection of places of worship, schools and community gatherings, and protection of Jewish places of worship, schools and community gatherings. We can go to the next slide.
It's okay. Go one back.
Yeah, one back. Thank you so much. So here is a bit of no problem. Here is a bit of background about the. I cannot hear very well, colleagues. I don't know. There is a bit of background noise. Okay, now it's better. Thank you. So here you can see a bit. I read about the background of why we have these 2 priorities within the call. As you know very well, public spaces, and in particular places of worship, are really hard to protect and make resilient because of their symbolic value, because of their openness that make them really a target for terrorist attacks. So let's say the objective ideally in the European Union for us is to protect and help enhance the resilience of places of worship without making them into fortresses, respecting their primarily sacred element. So we we have to admit that we have seen attacks, unfortunately, on places of worship in the past years, and these attacks serve as a worrisome reminder about the need that we have in the European Union to take account of religionities and act upon them. This is precisely what this call aims to do. And among the documents that I would like to cite you in terms of background for both priorities are the action plan for the protection of public spaces that was adopted in 2017. And it's really the main overarching, let's say, document that guides our effort when it comes to protection of public spaces, including places of worship, as well as the counter-terrorism agenda that we launched in December 2020, after a string of terror attacks on public spaces in the European Union. And there is really inside the counter-terrorism agenda also a reminder about the protection of places of worship. When it comes to the protection of Jewish places of worship, because as you can see, we have two different priorities, one interfaith protection of places of worship and another one Jewish protection of places of worship. When it comes to the protection of Jewish places of worship, a very important document that I would like to draw your attention on is the EU strategy of combating anti-Semitism and fostering Jewish life that we launched in 2021. And unfortunately, we are seeing a rise in acts of anti-Semitism, including attacks to Jewish places of worship in the last period. And we hope really this call is a clear signal also to the Jewish communities of our efforts in this regard. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. So a little bit more about the objectives of this when it comes to these two priorities. The two priorities are aimed at enhancing the protection of places of worship in the case of the protection of places of worship of all faiths. It's really aimed at places of worship of all faiths. Again, educational institutions like schools and that are visibly associated with a certain faith, as well as places where the worshippers, these religious communities gather, and these places as well need to be, in order to be included in the call, visibly associated with a religious faith. When it comes to the protection of Jewish places of worship, the call is aimed at enhancing the protection of Jewish places of worship, Jewish community gatherings, and Jewish school and educational institutions. Next slide, please. When it comes to really practical actions that would be that we are looking forward to seeing in project applications, and that we hope this call will help materialize, are the establishment or stepping up of cooperation between public authorities like law enforcement, government institutions, and faith-based leaders and congregations. This is very important, and faith-based as well. Not only leaders, but also the communities. We're looking at really an active role of the communities. We're also looking at projects that design and implement security awareness raising campaigns, specifically targeting places of worship and Jewish places of worship. This security awareness campaign have to be really practical in terms of like models that can be used by the communities, like the hide, run, and tell that many of you, I'm sure, in the audience will be familiar with. So really looking at ways we can increase the security of the religious communities. The sharing of knowledge, tools, and good practices also on protective measures are really important, especially when it comes to kind of like cascading effect between countries in the EU that perhaps have more knowledge and more instruments in the protection of places of worship towards countries that maybe have a bit less, trying to really maximize have a maximizing cascading effect, let's say. We're also looking at the development and implementation of security concept, measures, programs, and communication plans that can really be applied to the places of worship, to the schools, to the community gatherings, and really have a practical impact on the communities that use these public spaces. And we're also, lastly but not least important, looking at the development and implementation of trainings and train the trainers as well, modules that can have really a multiplying effect. Next slide, please. We have, when it comes to the two priorities, some further considerations. For the first topic, as you know very well, is the protection of places of worship of all faiths, meaning that we really highly value project proposals that have a multi-faith approach, that try to include as many faiths possible, and really that are applicable to as many religious communities as possible. We're looking at project proposals that would target at least 2 different religious communities. They can have them as consortium members, or they can have them as participants in project activities. Really, this is one element when it comes to the multi-faith protection of places of worship, schools, and community gatherings that is really key when it comes to this protect call. While for the priority on Jewish protection of places of worship, school, and community gatherings, of course, is really reserved to the Jewish faith. For both topics, the security awareness campaigns and the communication campaigns really are an important element for us. We're looking at security awareness raising campaigns and communication campaigns that can really reach as many members of the community as possible, and they need to have a solid communication strategy based on a well-defined methodologies, and really acknowledging the specificities, I apologize, of the different faith communities and the different places of worship associated with different faiths. This is a bit everything that I hoped to pass to you regarding these 2 priorities. And when it comes to the further references and further documents that you can read related to this priorities within the call, then you can find them in the next slide, and they're available to you for consultation. Again, as my colleagues say, if you have any other questions regarding this topic, you're welcome to send them to the functional mailbox of the ISF calls, and I'll be happy to answer these questions later on in writing. So thank you very much. I'll pass the microphone to my colleagues for the next priorities. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining this event. Just a brief introduction of the CBRN priority, which is one of the 6 priorities of this call. CBRN, it's quite a niche priority, I must admit, but I hope some of you are interested in it. CBRN stands for chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, terrorist threats. And the priority of this call is CBRN threats in public spaces. It's a high impact and low probability event. So we hope that nothing will happen, but nevertheless, we would like to be prepared for that, especially that the threat picture changed slightly, especially after COVID-19 and with the Russian war of aggression on Ukraine. We have certain understanding that the threat, even though we don't see the concrete examples, but the threat might have increased, at least potentially. Our policy reference in this area is the Action Plan to Enhance Preparedness Against CBRN Threats, which was adopted in 2017. Given new developments, we are considering revision of the action plan, but that's something for later this year. So what we are looking for, as I mentioned, is to enhance the protection against and detection of CBRN threats for different types of public spaces and critical infrastructures. So those who are familiar with the topic, you probably are familiar also with the project that we financed in the past 2-3 calls. The examples would be like, for instance, TransTun, which was a project focusing on chemical threat in cross-border tunnels. So very specific environment, tunnels between two countries. And something that is, again, low probability, but the impact, as we have seen during certain accidents, could be really high. So that was one example. Then projects such as Safe Stadium, which focuses on sport arenas, again, potentially very high impact, and the operators of this arenas are normally not prepared for a CBRN terrorist attack. So what we are looking for is development of guidance material, implementation of security concepts, measures and programs, and development and implementation of trainings. And again, all this in the context of public spaces and critical infrastructures. Now, what we particularly look for in the projects is to have a wide representation of different target groups. So obviously, if you want to do something on terrorist threat, you cannot do it without law enforcement agencies. And if you want to do it properly, taking into account specificities of different venues, different types of public spaces or critical infrastructures, it's always a good idea to include operators of these facilities. So basically, these projects will be favored when you have cross-sectoral representation, law enforcement operators, sometimes also other target groups. And since we have had, as I mentioned, a few projects already covering different public spaces, there is a wealth of material already available. Therefore, we would favor projects which are putting forward innovative approaches to protection of public spaces and critical infrastructures against this CBRN threat. So, and you know, the budget, as it was, I'm sure, mentioned before, is 30 million for the total call, but we also have 6 priorities. So it's not that we will have a large number of projects for each priority, including CBRN. So basically, if you want to have high chances for selection, this slide is among the most important ones. So broad representation of target groups and innovative approach will be definitely favored.
Sorry, before we go on,
yes.
There is some construction work in the ground floor. I don't know if people online can hear properly. Can you please?
Is it bothering you?
It's gonna take 10 minutes more. I don't know if it's blocking the sound completely or if it's bearable. So please tell us if we can continue or if we should take a 10 minutes break. We can
hear you well. Okay.
Then we continue. All right. Okay, perfect.
Jose, is he online?
Yes.
And we hear you, Jose.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks
Yes.
a lot. My name is Jose Romero, and team leader of firearms in the counter-terrorist unit in the home. On the topic of the protection against the misuse and trafficking of firearms. Next slide, please. As you can see, the illicit firearms and other small and light weapons continue to contribute to the instability and violence. And this is something that has been identified by the European Union, and the topic of firearms has been included in the current EU Security Union strategy. We have a specific EU action plan on firearms trafficking for the period 2020-2025 that cover both the EU and Southeastern Europe. And since 2014, it is a priority for the European Union member state with a specific impact firearms. The threat posed by firearms misuse and trafficking is also affecting the security of European Union in terms of terrorists. Obviously, firearms are one of the preferred means of committing terrorist attacks, unfortunately, in the European Union, and that's why it's also part of the counter-terrorist agenda. Next slide, please. The topics of firearms in this protocol is something new. We had to be very specific on our objectives. Basically, the overall goal of the topic of firearms is to support the Commission in the fulfilling of the priorities of the EU Action Plan on Firearms Trafficking. Such a action plans is quite holistic. There are 4 priorities which correspond to the 4 objectives of this protocol. So the first one, safeguarding the legal market and limiting diversion. That is, we want to do it through a better understanding of the current emerging and future threats, and through development to increase the effectiveness of the European Union legislative acts, mainly the Firearms Directive. The second objective is building a better intelligent picture and further developing knowledge of threats. We are gonna try to do it by increasing the information available at EU level of incidents where firearms are involved, such as gun incidents and especially seizures of firearms. The third objective is stepping up law enforcement to increase pressure on criminal markets. It is important for us, the new technologies, also to reinforce the current or future tools, such as ballistic system, mechanisms available, and notably establishing a fully functional national finance focal point as entities in the member state and in non-EU countries of interest. The tasks and characteristics of such entities are reflected in Council conclusions that you can read in the, and there is a reference in the call. The last objective, stepping up international cooperation. The objective is to have a better knowledge of what's going on, and also to increase the exchange of information and cooperation between EU and non-EU countries. Next slide, please. This slide as actions reflect the expect impact of the activities that you can find in the call. So the first objective, what we expect and our actions to grant and enhance knowledge of current, emerging and future threats, and also to increase effectiveness of the implementation of Firearms Directive. That could be by a number of activities and outcomes, like could be organizing meetings, workshops, or conducting research studies with a special focus on 3D printed weapons and new emerging technology, but other new technologies, also research on the effect of the illegal conversion of weapons under the scope of the Firearms Directive. Assessing threats posed by weapons currently out of the scope of the Firearms Directive, drafting policy recommendation, development of IT applications on a number of issues that are reflected in the call. The proposals should take into consideration case studies from law enforcement agencies and judicial actors. The second objective, the impact expected, is to improve the intelligent picture, especially through the establishment of the harmonized collection of data on seized firearms and the exchange of information. This could be by projects and proposals where there are activities and outcomes related with organization of coordinating meetings, and especially the creation or update of national IT system designed to store data on seized firearms, and promoting the harmonization of these databases and interconnections on EU level. This harmonization should target as many member states as possible, and other potential activities could be to create national statistics sets focused on measuring the impact in our society of firearms. Of course, it is also important potential projects focus on development or improvement of real-time tracking tools for firearms-related incidents. The third objective, the expected impacts are mainly the strengthening of national firearms focal point capacities to better fulfill their task, and enhancing capabilities of member states to exchange ballistic information using the standard X3P, and also enhancing law enforcement capacities to use new technology in their daily work. So examples of activities and outcomes could be field visits and training for member states, as well as operational and capacity building activities linked to national firearms focal points. Also interlinked with the previous objective, the harmonized development of IT system or operational activities related with joint action days, cyber patrolling operations, and a number of other activities reflected in the call. Also, the proposals fulfilling this objective could include activities focused on the improvement of the exchange of ballistic information. It is mandatory the capacity to use compatible format X3P. And also this project should include how to interconnect or coordinate the exchange of this ballistic information with the establishment of the EU hub of firearms intelligence in Europol. And finally, the last objective, to increase capacity of EU and non-EU countries to counter firearms trafficking. As expected impact, there are a number of activities and outcomes reflected in the call, and this could be operational or strategic meetings to plan transnational actions such as joint operation, cross-border operational law enforcement activities. The focus should be to increase the capacity of non-EU countries to deal with all aspects of firearms control, and also to harmonize their capacities with the EU standards. Under these objectives, the proposals should have as co-beneficiaries at least one of the non-EU countries included in the EU Action Plan on Firearms Trafficking. Last slide, please. Further consideration, something that is very important and well reflected in the call, that the proposals under this topic must carry out activities and outcomes of at least one of the objectives, but it's not necessary, of course, to cover all 4 objectives. And it will be also particularly relevant that the proposals are aligned with the goals and actions of the MPAC firearms. And it is especially relevant to include as co-beneficiary any of the member states participating in the MPAC firearms, but especially under the roles of drivers, co-drivers, or action leaders. And that the proposals establish correctly how they are going to cooperate and how is going to be the interaction with EU agencies, especially Europol, Frontex, and CIPOL. So this is all from my side. If there is any question, of course, you can do it by chat or later in the indicated email of ISF funds. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Jose.
Good morning from my side. My name is Valerio Liberatori, work in the same unit, D2 counterterrorism. And this intervention is meant to provide you with some info on this topic. So the protection against potential threats posed by non-cooperative drones. Allow me to say as forward that this topic is closely linked with the new adopted counter drone communication that has been adopted by the Commission back in 18 October last year, which is identifying specific key actions clustered into 6 pillars. And this call is aiming to attract projects that can support us in implementing these identified key actions. But if you allow me some words of background, the EU Security Union strategy and the counter-terrorism agenda already highlighted the threat posed by non-cooperative drones as a serious concern in Europe. And despite the fact that the EU has not suffered a major attack making use of a drone, the rapidly advancing capabilities of drones are posing a growing security risk that we are considering. As a matter of fact, drones are set to grow significantly in terms of number, but also technological capabilities, speed, agility, maximum range, payload capabilities, precision of sensor, and use of artificial intelligence. And against this background, as mentioned, the Commission has adopted this communication that was announced as a flagship action in the Drone 2.0 strategy, and which is outlining 18 key actions clustered into 6 pillars. And this call is referring specifically on 2 key actions. Indeed, the overall goal of this topic is to support, as mentioned, the Commission in the implementation of the adopted counter-drone communication in 2 objectives. Contributing to the implementation of a harmonized testing methodology for counter-drone system and a mapping of the current regulatory measures. The first objective is referring to the key action 4, which I quote from the communication. The Commission will work on implementing a harmonized testing methodology for counter-drone system based on the outcomes of the Courageous project. So indeed, we have a wide array of available options on the market, offering promising solutions. But as we know, reality is that there is no one silver bullet solution. And we will try to support member states in making the right choice when it comes to choosing an efficient counter-drone system. Reality is that the different testing initiatives are relying on different methodologies, so it makes it difficult to compare the results, and therefore these objectives is aiming towards identifying a harmonized testing methodology. Only with a harmonized testing methodology we can then proceed in identifying the most efficient system. The second objective is referring to the key action 16 of the communication, which is the one referring to the strands of work aiming towards performing a mapping study to identify regulatory needs and the potential for harmonizing member states' laws and procedures. Again, also in this case, the legal framework is quite heterogeneous. In different member states, we have different rules, different units that are responsible to use counter-drone systems, ranging from law enforcement assets, but also the military, Air Force. So we do have some non-binding guidelines that have been developed referring to the airports coverage, but first of all, we need to perform a proper mapping study on which is the state of play in order then to adopt possible legislative initiatives. When it comes to the actions, Here, we are referring more on the actions that this project are expected, the applicants are expected to perform in order to achieve the desired objective. So the first two are related to the two objectives, namely the establishment of a harmonized testing methodology and the mapping of the existing regulatory needs. Furthermore, we are expecting this project to achieve an increased awareness of counter-drone the use of counter-drone system among the law enforcement authorities throughout Europe, establishing a structured dialogue with industry, operators, and developing a multi-agency and multinational approach. Among the more detailed actions that you will find inside the call, I would like to quote here the need to establish proper cooperation with our joint research center, which we would play a relevant role for the implementation of the communication, such as the possible establishment of a center of excellence, the tracking of the most efficient technology. So for us, it's absolutely important to be able to establish fruitful cooperation, and also the support in conducting a real-time analysis of the drone incidents, since for the time being we don't have a proper tracking of the drone incidents that are happening in Europe, affecting off-the-shelf drones and non-cooperative ones. Finally, just allow me to underline that it will be considered as particularly relevant the fact that the applicant could include a law enforcement agency, since, as mentioned, law enforcement are playing a paramount role as first responder in the use of counter-UAS systems. Cooperation with the CHEN and the CHENELEC, the European Committee for Standardization, and the European Electrotechnical Committee for Standardization would be considered, of course, an added value. And also the indications on modalities for the sharing of the outcomes of the project with all key stakeholders in member states and in the use of European Commission Secure Communication System would be also considered of particular relevance. As mentioned by my colleagues, I'm ready to answer to further questions on the mentioned channels. Thank you so much for your attention.
Yes.
I'm good to go. All right. So good morning, everyone. My name is Rad Olszewski. I work also like Valerio in the counterterrorism unit, dealing with the explosive detection in the different areas. And in here, we're going to give you some background on this specific call proposal on explosive detection dogs. One thing I wanted to give you is perhaps.
No, it's working. It's fine.
Yes.
It's fine.
Okay.
It's quite
is what is important to put in the context of this call is background of why we're doing this, so that you understand that there's a number of details that you can find online. Some of the documents that are referred to in this call are also available. We are, of course, ready to support and provide additional information. But the overall concept of this is notably falling within the scope of the EU action in order to improve the detection performance against different threats, notably explosives, in public spaces and critical infrastructures. This is what the EU counterterrorism strategy have outlined in 2020, and this is part, and this element on detection dogs is part of that overall strategy and actions. You may find online already, if you type EU voluntary detection requirements for X-ray. This is one of the technologies that is used in public spaces. It's critical infrastructures. And this is an example, an illustration of a deliverable that the Commission has, together with member states and GRC, developed since the adoption of the agenda. Detection dogs is also an area where this work is taking place. There are some colleagues that are online that will remember that in 2012, EU established the so-called EU Explosive Detection Dog Working Group. We need to know in this context that there are EU standards for detection dogs in the field of aviation. So there are very strict and detailed requirements applying to training, certification, and the use of those detection dogs in the aviation field. Outside of the aviation field, unfortunately, I must say, and many of my colleagues who work with us in the detection working group, these standards, there are no standards, very few standards exist. And in particularly among the private entities, lots of different fragmentation exists, which results in that the detection dogs are not performing even closely to the level of those deployed in aviation. And for that very reason, there has been lots of work done already before. As explosive detection dogs are going to be used more frequently in these areas, we therefore have this initiative to try to support member states, to try to support operators. We want to provide voluntary support. Of course, it's not mandatory in this field. Member states are responsible for security in their states. And so here we are doing is part of this call is to provide a regional certification and training capacities to member states who can, just like it is the case in aviation, rely on other member states. So what happens in aviation today is that in some cases, since the standard is the same, to establish a certification facility is very costly. Some member states basically send operators to other member states where certification is performed on behalf of the other state. So again, it's easy when you have a common standard, and that's also something that we have developed on a voluntary basis in the field of dogs. So that's in a nutshell the overall aspect. This is going to serve the support of different entities and different activities in the future. Critical infrastructures I already mentioned, but public events such as the Olympics and such of other public events where there is a requirement for such detection method. So that's one aspect that we want. So that's the background of this. Again, as you see in terms of objectives, the calls should have two purposes. One, to establish training aspect, training platforms, and the second one is to establish certification platforms. These EU Detection Dog Working Group have developed a lot of already established and endorsed requirements for training and for certification for methodology, which you can, some of these documents you can find online, other ones have to be requested. But again, the objectives are twofold, training and certification, which is going to allow for deliverables towards member states or towards operators. Again, what we want to do is we want to create centers that can offer free certification or free training. Again, training sometimes takes 6 months, but let's say elements of certain types of training, which is shorter, to member states or to the operators, so that we can allow this very effective method to also be used together with the other standards or other technologies. So in terms of actions, again, is to recall that what we want to do is we want to provide concretely a platform where private entities or public entities, meaning, let's say, police dogs, or it could be customs, or it could be other, that wish to benefit from these regional training certification platforms can be used. And for that reason, there has to be that. So for that reason, what we want to also seek is to have it somewhat geographically spread, so that basically we don't expect Swedish dogs, for example, that would want to have to travel across all Europe to furthest point in Spain in order to get certified. And so what we would like to do is ensure that we have some rigid geographical spread that allows for this process. One final point where you see issue with Ukraine, as you will see online, there's lots of activities undertaken by the European Commission in terms of supporting the Ukraine with demining program. And this is something that is also noted in this call. We would like to be able to benefit and to further develop that program. So again, here, what are the considerations are, again, certification and trainings available to public or private entities. We look forward to the calls that are aligned with the existing either detection requirements, as may be for aviation, but notably recommended practices and endorsed requirements set by the EU explosive detection dog expert groups. And again, we're trying to see how we can develop the best way to provide these type of services by having geographically distributed facilities. And finally, also to see how we can support the Ukraine demining program continuation, because obviously the war is ongoing, and again, to finish up, say, the demining task in front of Ukraine is huge. To illustrate, the contaminated areas with mines and explosives is equivalent to that of Austria, Denmark, and Switzerland. So huge task in front of us. Again, these are the considerations for you. I'm happy to provide any feedback and details. Well, you have the contact points, so I stay available for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Rad, and thank you to all the colleagues from the two. So this is the end of the session. I said at the beginning, we will not be answering questions now. We are going to collect everything that you've asked in chat, and we will create a document that we will publish in the portal. Questions can also be sent to the functional mailbox that we have shared already. But please remember that questions representing a pre-proposal check will not be answered. So, for example, is this consortium good enough, relevant enough? This we will not answer. We only answer and clarify points on the content of the call text. If something is not clear enough, we will answer, but we will not do anything that implies a pre-proposal check. Also, you can consult already the existing FAQs in the portal, because most of your doubts probably can be cleared out with this tool. If we receive a question very frequently and we think it's not clear enough from the call text, then we will create an FAQ, a new one. So I just wanted to clarify that before closing, and to let you know once again that from next week, in the coming days, as soon as possible, we will publish in the portal the recording of the session, the materials, meaning the presentation, and the questions that I just explained, the questions we are sending in the chat. That's all from my side. I want to wish everyone good luck with the applications, both for the OC and the Protect call. And thank you for your attention. Have a good day.
Thank you. We are very pleased to see that so many of you have joined, and that means many of you are interested, and we might receive a lot of applications. So good luck. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you. Thank you very much.